Sally, and I'm here to tell you that you're listening to the Decarbonisation Dialogue, a podcast from Salix.
Welcome to Delivering on Climate Change, our collective challenge. Welcome to the Decarbonisation Dialogue. I am Hannah Walker, and I believe that the best way to communicate a message is by being passionate about what you are talking about. Through that passion, I believe you take people with you and create action using your influence to make change and make a difference. Today, our task is to get all of us to net zero. My guest today is Julian Atkins, who is Net Zero Programme Director, Church of England. Julian has worked across the public sector for more than 20 years. He has a long interest in our natural world and environment, and before working for the Church of England, worked as Chief Executive for the Brecon Beacons National Park Authority, tasked with managing and protecting the landscape of Mid Wales. As Net Zero Programme Director, Julian leads the Church of England's Net Zero Carbon 2030 programme, working in partnership with colleagues across the Church to help deliver upon the ambition set by the General Synod in 2020. The Church of England has a bold 2030 ambition, which it has set itself, and through the route to net zero carbon. Julian has the huge challenge of using the funding which has been allocated at a national level to lever in more resources by working in partnership, being creative at parish and national levels. It's his job, alongside key stakeholders, to develop a joined-up programme, allocating national church funds to local and innovative projects and always assessing the impact of that funding. Thank you to Julian for coming along today. Thank you.
Very pleased to be here, Hannah.
I'm going to start with the issue at hand, which is climate change. We're going to get straight in, and we're looking at massive challenges as we face climate change. And in fact, it's the very threat to our existence. We see social injustice as often affecting the people who can least afford it. And we see that suffering in our news most days. Why can't we all agree, Julian, what's happening to our planet? And what role does the church have to play alongside governments, business and charity, and all of us?
It's a really good question, Hannah, isn't it? I think you would think it would be obvious when we see the impacts of climate change around the world. But you could equally say, well, why don't we all agree on politics? And people have different perspectives about things. Some because perhaps they're unaware of the impacts that we're seeing across the planet and at home now. And some people have other priorities and more pressing needs in their daily lives. And as the Church of England, caring for God's creation is intrinsic in what we're about as a Christian faith. It's part of our 5 marks of mission. And so we, as Christians, in caring deeply for creation, then need to take the steps that we can to make sure that how we tread on this planet is done so in as light a way as possible. And if we can tackle the varied buildings in our care, the programme is looking at 32,000 buildings across our portfolio. Half of those are churches. Some of those, cathedrals, really valuable historic buildings, central to many communities and important in the nation's social history. If we can demonstrate how we can decarbonise our complex and challenging buildings and show what's possible, then hopefully that will inspire others to take steps in their own lives and in things that they have control over. Even one small change can make a difference.
And indeed, when you quote that mission, which is, I think the late Pope Francis said in 2014, if we destroy creation, creation will destroy us. I think that's important to think about. So the Church of England, you've got huge targets, haven't you? You've provided a 2030 target, and of course the UK national target is 2050, and you've targeted millions of pounds to reduce carbon emissions over the next 6 years or so. You talked there about the cathedrals, the churches. When I think of cathedrals and churches, I think about the vastness, these huge cavernous spaces, which of course have and hold huge treasures, wonderful, as well as the people that come and go, huge treasures to be protected. How practical is your mission?
It's a challenging mission. The 2030 ambition was set because we are facing a climate emergency. And if it's an emergency and we think it's an emergency, then we should treat it as such. It's a huge challenge. It's one that is going to take a lot of concerted action. The funding that the church commissioners have made available to our work is a large sum of money. It's nowhere near enough. we know it's going to cost us a lot more. So the ambition has been set to try and see how far we can get moving forward in hope to get as far as possible in decarbonising our buildings. And some of our buildings are complex. And you cite the cathedrals, the larger churches. What we're trying to encourage our parishes to do is to look at their buildings, how they're used, and then develop heating and lighting plans that are appropriate for how the building is used on any given day of the week. Top 20% of our churches account for half the church carbon footprint. So that's where the emphasis on emissions lie. For a lot of our smaller churches, simple changes, things like changing over to LED light bulbs or making sure that you've not got drafty windows or doors and that the building is in sound repair, can have a big difference in how you have to heat it and light it. So what we're saying is look at the building, understand how your building performs, and then do the things that are appropriate for you and see, just make steps to do work that gets you as far as you can in an affordable way. Some of our buildings that are, the bigger buildings, they're looking at how they can heat their buildings in zones or develop areas of their buildings where they can have a warmer space for meetings, what have you. We're encouraging people to think about heating the people rather than the space. And in many cases that can work. But we recognise the scale of the challenge before us.
And of course, it's not just churches. I know you've got nearly 5,000 churches in the eco-church scheme, but it's not just churches and cathedrals. Let's talk about schools for a moment, because at Salix, we work a lot with schools across the country, a lot decarbonising schools, and along with the schemes that we deliver on behalf of governments. And schools are the church's highest carbon emitters, I think. I think I read in one of your reports, they account for about 48% of all emissions. And after that is the churches, as you've mentioned. And then, of course, housing, which would be good to talk about in a moment, with, I think, cathedrals actually emitting the least in all of that. But how do you find the response you get from schools in terms of action? Because, of course, you're dealing with a lot of small schools, a lot of very small parish schools. And how do you tie that in with the education of children, the people who use those buildings?
We're trying to approach it in an integrated way. So our Church of England schools, as you say, many of them are smaller primary schools, although we do have some secondary schools. What we've been trying to do is support those schools to develop their net zero and decarbonisation plans and to get them ready to be able to take advantage of government funding that's being made available through public sector decarbonisation scheme, for example. We've been having some really good success with that. Schools that we submitted under round 4 of PSDS were all approved. Not a huge number of projects, but everyone was approved. And that's actually a success rate that is much better than most other educational authorities. So we're trying to make sure we're maximising the external money that we're drawing into the programme as well. But it's not just about decarbonising the buildings. We also recognise that we can play a role in educating future generations on the importance of the environment and the importance of minimising our impact on the planet. And so we really try and work in partnership with school administrations to make sure that we're integrating what we're trying to do and aligning it with the curriculum and what they're doing in terms of educating younger people. And we know that for younger people, the environment is a subject of concern. And so we have one eye on the future in terms of where our congregations of the future will come from. So we're trying to approach it in that holistic way.
And Julian, aren't the young people educating us as well? I know when I go along to those schools, they have got a lot to say and there's a lot of learning for us.
They are indeed, and we should do everything we can to listen to them, because often they say things which are very wise.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk for a moment about church housing, because you've got, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you've got about 9,600 clergy homes across the Church of England estate, and a further, I believe, 1,500 homes for retired clergy. And I know that you're busy doing a lot of surveys across that estate, looking at all of the issues around heating and keeping those houses warm. How are you finding this work? And do you think people get on board with net zero in terms of their own homes?
What we're doing is working with all of our dioceses at the moment on developing some demonstrator projects. So we're trying to encourage every diocese to take one of their clergy properties, do reasonably deep retrofit works on it in terms of fabric first interventions, insulation, that kind of thing, improve windows, air source heat pumps if it's appropriate and affordable to do so, things that you would normally do to any typical residential property. And we want to support them, and we're giving them some funding to help do this work. So they've gone through the process of tackling, at least one home, and then for us to learn what the impact of that is and how that's beneficial to the people who are living there, our clergy. So we're trying to select properties where disturbance to clergy is as minimal as possible. Our clergy do move to new roles, and the houses that they occupy do become vacant for periods, and that's an obvious time to try and do work to property. But then where clergy, are in residence, we work with them to make sure that the works don't cause too much disruption. For our larger bishops' houses, for example, which are typically much more complicated buildings, the best time to do that work is when there's a vacancy. So we're trying to do it in as considered a way. But the signs of what we've been doing on housing are really, really encouraging. The early indications are that we're making substantial inroads to carbon emissions reductions. I don't have the final figures from the first projects to hand, and we need to validate that in terms of the energy bills as we monitor them. But so far, the results are really, really encouraging. That should give us cause for hope and optimism, but it should also help others in terms of our own homes to realise that actually even small changes to our properties can make a big difference.
Yes.
And aggregating all of those up, if we all did a couple of things to our properties to make them more energy efficient, scale that up across the country, and we would have a big impact.
Yes, and in fact, we do also a lot of work with housing providers, and the work that's going on is life-changing for the people impacted by that, having warmer homes that people can enjoy and spend more time in. So, but there's a huge amount. It's a huge. We've talked about the churches, the cathedrals, the schools, the housing. There's a lot to be done, and remaining positive is something that we have to do all of the time to create the action that we need. But the general public, what do you think is the public's appetite for lifestyle changes that are needed, whether it's reducing the meat in our diets, whether it's using less plastic? What do you think, how do you feel about our appetite for change?
I remain optimistic. I think deep down, if you talk to most people across the country, they would recognise that we all need to take steps to reduce our footprints, and that the impact of our actions as a human species on the rest of the planet has been negative, and that we need to still. We may not hear it. You don't necessarily always hear those messages in the media, but I think deep down most people know we need to do things to change our lifestyles. Whether they then connect the dots in terms of what that means in practice, I'm not so sure. But if you look at the support that we have at the parish level, we keep coming across churches that are doing things because they think it's the right thing to do. Those congregations have taken a choice. They're doing things without reference to the funding that we're making available through the programme. There's a silent majority out there that are quietly getting on and making the changes into their own lifestyles and to the things that they care deeply about, if that's church, in our case, and that's beneficial.
And your own learning in this whole journey, how is that being shared? There's obviously a huge community within the church, but you're learning huge amounts, presumably, around dealing with difficult spaces, protected spaces, big space, and then the housing as well. How is that being used? And also your response to the technological advances, because we've got changes in technology all of the time too.
Yeah, and we're trying to keep pace with the technological changes. But a lot of the technology that you can put into buildings now to decarbonisation is well understood and tried and tested. So we're not necessarily looking for silver bullets that aren't there yet. In some areas that may be the case, but technology around air source heat pumps, solar PV, LED lights, that kind of thing is reasonably well established now. We're very clear that certainly in the context of other faith-based organisations, we're to some extent a leader. We have the benefit of the resources at our disposal. Not many other faith organisations have that. So we're trying to share our knowledge as widely as possible. We've got a website. We put case studies and articles up regularly on our website. We're just about to publish our second impact report, and that is getting wide. The first one got wide readership in every continent apart from Antarctica, actually. So people are watching what we're doing. Also, we do things like an annual conference where we bring the net zero roles from our diocese and invite others to those events as well, if there's space available. So we're trying to operate in as open and a transparent way as possible and share what we learn. That's part of our role as the Church of England is to demonstrate leadership in this space.
Mm-hmm. And indeed, you mentioned the impact report, there was the initial impact report, the Net Zero Carbon 2030 impact report. And I must quote this because I think you knew this was coming. It's just a quote I just love from John F. Kennedy, who said, and you quoted it, "We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard, because that goal will serve to organise and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win." Having worked on this agenda for a while now, and that is your main part of your job, how do you feel about that quote now when you look at that?
If President Kennedy had been alive today, he could have been saying that about climate change. The difference being that in 1962, that was a choice to try and put people on the moon. Climate action is not a choice for us, it's an imperative, and I think that's the difference. Yes, we know what we're trying to do is hard. It may even be unattainable in the short term, but that shouldn't detract us from trying to get as far as we humanly can do. I remain positive and I remain optimistic. In 1962, if you could take the resources available at that stage, not knowing that you could even land people on the moon and make that commitment and then succeed, I take inspiration from that a step into the unknown leads to the second step and the third step. And once you start on a journey, you don't necessarily know at the start of that journey whether you'll get to your destination, but by keeping moving forwards, you get closer to it. So we're moving forward in hope, in the knowledge that we'll take as many steps as we can using the resources that we've got and trying to use them as wisely as possible and sharing the knowledge so that others benefit from what we're doing.
Now, your own lifestyle, how sustainable are you day to day? Are you aware of your environment locally? Because you've talked about the small things. If we all do something, everything counts. How sustainable are you?
Probably not as sustainable as I should be. My wife and I, we try and be as sustainable. We live in the countryside. We try and do as many things in terms of buying things locally. And we don't have children, for example. So we try and buy seasonally. And we do try and watch our impact on the planet by being avid recyclers, that kind of thing. If I have to travel anywhere with work, I try and do that by public transport if I can. We've switched over to LED lights mostly in the house. We live in a little listed cottage, so there are limits to what we can do from a fabric perspective. But always looking at, is there something else that we can do to alter our lifestyle,
and of course,
and try and have at least one meat-free meal a week.
Yes, exactly. And of course, your work, it's hugely inspirational. And as you say, it's one step at a time, and being aware of that destination and with that aim. And there's so much hope. We have this wonderful planet and a lot to protect. Thinking very carefully about that Kennedy quotes is quite incredible. Now, what next for you in your career? Because you've got quite a job, and this is no small task. What next?
It's a good question. I'm coming towards the end of my career, so part of my role is doing everything I can in this role to make a difference. I got into sort of built heritage and environment conservation as a career. My background is in community planning. I chose that career having started thinking I was going to be a scientist because I wanted to make a difference to the environment and I wanted to make people's lives better and the environments that they lived in better. And that sort of led my career over the last 30 years or so. But all of my experience to date has come together in this role to really try and leave a legacy and a blueprint for how we move forwards. Because we'll get to 2030 and there'll be still more things that we need to do. Our route map, for example, recognises that we also need to look at our upstream and downstream impacts from procurement, buying, and the energy we use and the waste we produce as an organisation, for example. So what are known as Scope 3 emissions need to be looked at a later stage in our route map. So the work will still need to go forwards. So part of my role also is helping to build that generation of specialists that can take the work forward after I'm gone. Net zero and climate action, it's relatively a new area of work. So we're all learning things, a lot of new things, and how to apply them in our work context, as well as our personal context. Trying to think what I leave behind is what I see for the future. And I'm hugely encouraged by the progress we've made in not quite 3 years. The programme formally started at the beginning of 2023. And if you'd said on January the 1st, 2023, that we'd be where we are now, I would have been delighted with that. Yes, it's taking us longer, but we're trying to move at pace.
I can see that you have achieved an a huge amount with money being spent on energy efficiency and creating the measures that are required to create, as you say, that blueprint and legacy for the future. Thank you very much to Julian for your time today and for providing such valuable insight. There can be no doubt that climate change is the biggest challenge of our time. Today, we must reduce greenhouse gas emissions to slow global warming. Today, we must act for tomorrow, adjusting our lifestyles to current and future impacts of climate change. Today, we must use our collective wisdom to deliver on our climate commitments. Today, we work for tomorrow's world. Thank you very much again to Julian for taking the time and talking to us about your vision and about how you are so set on taking those crucial steps and creating that legacy for the future. Thank you, Julian.
Thank you, Hannah. Delighted to have been able to join you.
I'm Charles Pegg, and I'm here to tell you that you've been listening to the Decarbonisation Dialogue, a podcast from Salix. For more information about our work and to find more content, please visit salixfinance.co.uk/podcasts.